What do canned soup, spam and instant coffee have in common? They all owe their existence to one thing: war. War has shaped way more than just borders. It has also transformed the very food on our plates. Canning, processed foods, industrial farming, and even some of your favorite snacks all have surprising wartime origins. In this video, we'll explore how war gave birth to food innovations that forever changed the way we eat. Wars have always been a part of human existence. The Napoleonic Wars, which lasted from 1803 to 1815, while not the first major conflict in history, was among the first global war. It had a widespread impact across multiple continents. The military commanders in charge of Napoleon's large army faced a huge logistical challenge. How do they keep the men well fed while on extended military campaigns far from home? With tens of thousands of soldiers often marching for weeks or months, the need for fresh, unspoiled food became one of the most critical issues to solve. The production of food was arguably as important as the production of ammunition. Traditional preservation methods like salting, drying or smoking were inadequate for such large forces. Soldiers were malnourished and started falling sick easily. Spoiled food was affecting the soldiers' health and their effectiveness in battle. Faced with this problem, French chef Nicolas Appert began experimenting with ways to preserve food for long periods without it going bad. By 1809, he had discovered a groundbreaking method: canning. Appert found that by placing food in glass jars, sealing them with cork and wax, and then boiling the jars, he could kill the bacteria and enzymes that caused spoilage. This method allowed food to remain fresh for months, even years, which was unheard of at the time. Appert's innovation gave the French military a significant advantage, allowing them to supply troops with preserved food during long campaigns. But the true impact of canning was felt after the war. What began as a military necessity quickly spread to the civilian market. It revolutionized food storage on a global scale. Appert's process was adopted across Europe and beyond, leading to the creation of the first large-scale canning factories. Over the next few decades, metal cans replaced glass jars, making the process even more efficient and widespread. By the mid-19th century, canned foods had become a staple in many households, giving ordinary people access to preserved fruits, vegetables, meats, and fish regardless of the season. 46 years after the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the American Civil War began in 1861. And just like in Napoleon Bonaparte's war, feeding the massive numbers of soldiers on both sides was a significant challenge. This created an urgent need for non-perishable, lightweight, and easily transportable food, sparking the widespread development and use of dried foods. Drying food had long been a method of preservation, but during the Civil War, the process became more refined and industrialized to meet the army's needs. Techniques were enhanced to dry fruits, vegetables, and meats, allowing large quantities of food to be stored without spoiling. One of the most notable wartime innovations was desiccated vegetables. These were mixtures of dried vegetables, typically potatoes, turnips, carrots, and onions, which were compressed into bricks or sheets. Though these dried foods didn't taste so great, they provided essential nutrients that helped prevent scurvy and other diseases caused by vitamin deficiencies. In the post-war period, the drying of fruits and vegetables became more common for households. Dried food industries began to emerge, allowing people to store food for longer periods and giving them access to fruits and vegetables in the winter. World War I brought about unprecedented challenges in feeding both soldiers on the front lines and civilians at home. As the war escalated, major food-producing regions were disrupted. Countries redirected their resources towards the war effort. Staple foods like wheat and sugar became increasingly scarce as supply chains broke down. Civilians were encouraged to limit their consumption of bread and sweets, and the government rationed these items to ensure there was enough to support fighting soldiers. Some American civilians voluntarily ate less of certain foods so they could be sent to hungry allies. Wheat in particular was critical as it was used to produce bread. Sugar, often imported, also became difficult to obtain due to disrupted global trade routes. To cope with the reduced availability of these key ingredients, people had to get creative with what they had. For example, instead of traditional wheat flour, households turned to substitutes like barley and even potato flour to bake bread. This war bread was often darker, denser, and less appetizing than pre-war loaves, but it was necessary to conserve resources. The scarcity of animal fats, including butter, even led to the rise of margarine as a butter substitute. Margarine was invented in the 19th century as a cheaper alternative to butter and became widely used during World War I due to its affordability and availability. Made primarily from vegetable oils, margarines could be produced without relying on the dwindling supply of dairy products. Though it wasn't as flavorful or healthy as butter, margarine became an essential replacement in kitchens throughout Europe and North America.
It's a crown, love. I switched from butter to imperial margarine.
You mean this is margarine?
Not just any margarine, imperial margarine. Once you taste it, you'll agree.
Sure tastes like butter.
Another significant innovation was the development of powdered eggs, which provided a shelf-stable alternative to fresh eggs. Before researching this video, I must confess I have never heard of powdered eggs. Very fascinating. Powdered eggs could be transported and stored more easily, making them ideal for both military use and civilian households during food shortages. Though many of these substitutes were born out of necessity, their use didn't disappear once the war ended. For example, margarine, which had been seen as an inferior product before the war, gained widespread acceptance and continued to be used long after butter shortages ended. Even the invention of the sponge cake, or at least its rise in popularity, is closely tied to the constraints and innovations born out of war. During the World Wars, many essential ingredients were strictly rationed, including butter, sugar, and eggs, key ingredients in traditional cakes. Traditional sponge cakes relied on simple ingredients like flour, sugar, eggs, and sometimes baking powder to create a light and airy dessert. Even though eggs were rationed, sponge cake recipes often called for fewer eggs than other types of cakes, making it easier for home bakers to stretch their rations. And even in situations where eggs weren't available, eggless sponge cakes were created by using alternative leavening agents like baking soda and vinegar to provide the lift normally produced by eggs. After World War I, people in the United States started eating a lot more sugar because it was cheap and abundant thanks to a production boom that came from the war. The war shifted who controlled the sugar business in places like the Caribbean and the Pacific. Before the war, sugar production was primarily controlled by colonial powers and large European-owned companies. In their place, American companies and investors increasingly took control. The American companies changed what kinds of sugars were made and where they sold it. We see a big increase in the production of refined sugar and also sugars that were processed in centrifugal mills. These sugars were nearly white even before they were refined. By the 1920s, people got used to seeing fewer types of sugar and mainly bought the mass-produced white version. Even today, most people still take the mass-produced white version over other types of sugar like brown sugar. World War II marked the beginning of large-scale industrial food production. The war intensified the need for massive quantities of food, not only to feed soldiers in distant theaters of war, but also to support civilian populations affected by rationing and supply shortages. Traditional farming methods and food distribution systems weren't capable of meeting this demand. To solve these problems, nations rapidly industrialized their agricultural systems. The mechanization of farming, using tractors, harvesters, and other machinery enabled farmers to produce more food with fewer workers, which was crucial since many men were away fighting. At the same time, the use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides became widespread to increase crop yields. The Haber-Bosch process, discovered by German chemist Fritz Haber, enabled the synthesis of ammonia from atmospheric nitrogen. Initially developed to produce explosives, the Haber-Bosch process allowed Germany to continue manufacturing munitions during the war despite being cut off from Chilean nitrate imports. The process not only supported Germany's war efforts but also laid the foundation for a new era in nitrogen production. After the war, the Haber-Bosch process revolutionized agriculture by providing an abundant source of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. This innovation allowed farmers to significantly increase crop yields and shift towards industrial farming practices. Monoculture farming became more common as synthetic fertilizers could replace traditional methods of soil replenishment. Industrial food production during World War II also extended to food processing and packaging. Governments and private companies worked together to develop ways to process and preserve food for long-term storage and transport. This led to the creation of iconic wartime foods like Spam, powdered milk, instant coffee, and dehydrated soups. Spam was developed as an affordable and long-lasting canned meat product consisting primarily of pork shoulder and ham. These foods were designed to be lightweight, have a long shelf life, and provide adequate nutrition, making them ideal for feeding soldiers. Following World War II, technological advancements continued to reshape how food was produced, preserved, and consumed. Quick, easy-to-prepare meals became highly desirable for families, especially as the pace of life sped up in the 1950s and 1960s. Food companies began mass-producing frozen fruits, vegetables, and meals that could be stored in freezers for months. Processed foods, which required minimal preparation, became popular with busy households. One of the most iconic innovations of this period was the frozen TV dinner. Introduced by the company Swanson in 1953, TV dinners were inspired by military rations. They were simple, pre-portioned meals that could be heated and eaten quickly. Packaged in a divided aluminum tray, the typical TV dinner featured staples like turkey, mashed potatoes, and vegetables, all of which could be reheated in the oven and ready to serve in under 30 minutes. The TV dinner wasn't just about convenience, it was also marketed as a way for families to enjoy meals while watching television, a rising cultural trend in the post-war era. Television sets became a central part of American living rooms, and TV dinners offered a way to enjoy meals without missing favorite shows. The cultural impact of these frozen meals was significant. They reshaped the way families dined together, allowing for quicker meal preparation and reinforcing the connection between food and entertainment. The post-World War II period also saw the introduction of sushi to the United States. Following the American occupation of Japan after World War II, more Americans were exposed to Japanese food culture, and sushi began to make its way into US cities. By the 1960s and 1970s, sushi had become a trendy food in major cities like Los Angeles and New York. Today, it's one of the most popular global cuisines in the US, with sushi restaurants and grocery store sushi available nationwide. Conversely, American soldiers stationed in Korea during and after the Korean War introduced local populations to Spam. In the post-war era, Korea was struggling with food shortages, and Spam became an affordable and convenient source of protein. Over time, Spam became ingrained in Korean cuisine. Dishes like budae jjigae, army stew, I don't know if I pronounced that well, which featured Spam, sausages and noodles, became a beloved comfort food in South Korea. Today, the globalization of food has only intensified, with dishes like sushi, pizza and tacos becoming staples in countries far removed from their places of origin. What began as a direct result of military presence abroad has become a permanent feature of the modern food landscape, where people have access to a world of flavors in their local grocery stores and restaurants. War has profoundly shaped the food industries in ways that still impact us today. From innovations in food preservation like canning and freezing, to the rise of processed and convenience foods, war has driven the need for efficient, long-lasting solutions. While these changes improved food availability, they also introduced challenges such as environmental degradation and health issues. Ultimately, the legacy of war on food reflects both progress and the ongoing need for balance between convenience, sustainability, and healthy living. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. You can also check out my video on marginalia. Very interesting. I think you will like it. Click on your screen.